Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, people of the world. It's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm continuing my Dean series, and I've learned so much from connecting with the various leaders in higher ed across George Mason. It's really been inspiring. And so I'm talking to someone, I guess, across the pond, and usually it's England, but they're across another pond. They're in Korea. I'm joined by Shannon Davis. Now, Shannon was the interim dean of Mason Korea, and now she has returned to her role as associate dean, I believe, in Mason Korea. And I'm just going to ask her questions about, her experience with academia and also just living somewhere different. But before we get into the show, Shannon, was there anything like just an introduction of who you are and things you want to share with the listeners?
Yeah, thanks, Philip, for having me on this podcast. It's really exciting to be able to talk about my journey. One thing just sort of to share, I've been at George Mason University since 2006. It was actually my first academic position, and finding my way to this administrative role it really was an interesting journey. And so I would love to be able to talk through that story with you and with the listeners, but I also want to frame it from the perspective of I'm a first generation college graduate. And all of my experiences, even including the decision to come to Korea, is really based on the formative experiences of having to work through being in college, applying to college, going to graduate school, and learning how to do all of that while also helping my family understand what that meant too. And so as we talk through whatever questions that you might have or whatever stories that I might share, I do want to frame it from the perspective of someone who was learning all along the way.
Yeah, I love that. So let's go back to, you said your first gen. Where'd you grow up? And I think college was a major decision. How did that go about?
Yeah, so I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, and my mom's family is from the Western North Carolina mountains, and my dad's family is from sort of the Lower Piedmont. Used to not be Charlotte, but now is Charlotte because Charlotte kind of expanded along the way. Yeah. Both of my grandfathers were farmers. Neither of my grandmothers knew how to drive. They didn't have driver's license. They didn't work outside of the home. My parents met whenever my mom left the mountains to try to find a job. She was the youngest of 6 kids. And my dad is one of those post-World War II kids who, as he will tell you, squeaked by in high school. The way that he was able to get to high school was that at the time he was a bus driver. He drove the school bus, and that was how he could get to school. Otherwise, he wouldn't necessarily.
He drove himself to school with the school bus.
Correct. He picked up all the other kids, and that was the way that he knew that he would regularly be able to get to school. Wow. So, and then I ended up graduating from the same high school that my dad did. And if we think about, generational mobility and especially physical mobility that people have in the United States right now, those of us with higher education degrees rarely can say that we have graduated from the same high school as our parents because our parents may have moved around. And so many first-gen students may be able to have that same kind of experience that you grew up and you had a similar kind of at least in the secondary education, time with same as your parents. Well, I graduated from the same high school as my dad. The 3 most important teachers in my life were all math teachers who had gone to high school with my father. They were the math teachers at the high school that they themselves had gone to high school at. And so they were friends of the family, sort of relatedly. I didn't see them socially, but my father knew them. And they were important to me in thinking about the differing kinds of roles that women could have. My mother had a wonderful job as an office manager. She took one night class that helped her expand what she did at school. But these three women really saw in me potential. They invested time in me. They encouraged me to do math competitions, to be involved in extracurricular activities, to engage in things that would have me, now that I am on this side of the desk, that would prepare me to be successful in the college application process. I was a National Merit Scholar semifinalist because they pushed me to do that kind of work. And so when I chose to apply to college, I had literally no idea what I was doing. I applied to just a few schools, and in that, the decision was, I want to go to a school that is close to family, but not too close to family. And truly, by the way that the universe gives you things, I ended up going to a small liberal arts public school, University of North Carolina, Asheville. That was the best decision that I could have made in my entire life.
I don't know, Shannon, we're two souls aligned. So I feel so much energy. So my mom is from North Carolina and grew up in Lincolnton, or was born in Lincolnton and went to Charlotte, and grew up in Charlotte. My grandfather, who I speak very fondly of, was a early Black doctor in Charlotte. So that historic thing. And then my aunt and uncle were Black professors at UNC Asheville in the 80s till now, and retired, and actually have a building named after them called James Mullen Hall. So that
Oh my God, I know them. Oh my gosh. I did not realize.
You know Charles James and Deborah James?
Yes.
Yeah, that's my aunt and uncle. That's my mom.
I had no idea.
Charles James is my mom's brother. My mom's Carol James, but that's small world. And so I just lit up. But shout out, but also prayers. I know this is going to be recorded and shared later, but shared to all my people in Asheville, after what they've gone through. But that's a small school. And was your mother from, you said western part, was she from the Asheville area? And that's what also
northern. She was from Jackson County, so further up in Silva. And so my grandmother was still there, and so that meant that if I wanted to go get a home cooked meal or visit with my family, I could do it there. But then also there wasn't that same kind of obligation, right? When you're leaving home for the first time, you want to have some autonomy, but you don't want to be too far from a washing machine. And so there was the ability to be close to family. And it was, again, the school itself was the best decision that I could have made. It was small liberal arts. I went to school, I mentioned the three people who were really important to me were all math teachers. So I thought I'd go be a math teacher, right? I'd go get my degree, focusing in on education, especially at the high school level, because these were three women who I respected. And I thought, hey, I could do what they're doing. I loved math. It made sense to me in the world, the logic of math. Well, I found that I was fine in my math class, right? I took my Calc 1 class my first semester. I had done that in high school, so it was a nice refresher. My second semester, I was also part of the what they called the Undergraduate Research Fellows Program. And so I didn't have the full fellowship, but I was one of the scholars, which meant I received some scholarship and I received all of the educational benefits. In that, there was a small group of us, where we would, through this cohort process, talk to each other about what classes to take, as well as whoever is on your residence hall floor that you talk to. Well, one of the people who was a year ahead of me said, hey, there's this class taught by this professor who, it's going to meet your, whatever the requirement was, right? One of the general education requirements. It's an honors course, so you can check that off too, checks 2 boxes with once. And he's a great professor. You'll like his class. I was like, oh, I need this advice. I have no idea what to take next semester. Perfect. The class was called Evolution, Revolution, and Social Change. It was taught by Professor Keith Bramlett, and it transformed my life. It was a class on social movements. And the way that he taught it was exactly the way that I wanted to teach whenever I became a college professor. The way that he engaged with students helped me see the interconnected pieces of everything. So in the middle of my second semester of my freshman year, I chose to become a sociology major as a result of his class. And full transparency, I still use numbers in my work. I'm a quantitative sociologist, right? So I do numbers. I don't teach math, but I do teach people to think logically using statistical inference, and to use critical thinking and to understand the value of data and how we evaluate the world. But I just do it differently. Yeah.
I love that. And I've also, now have a greater appreciation as I go through my doctoral studies. I was like, I'm a history major, undergrad and all that, but I understand that numbers and data have power, right? And how do you tell stories with that? So you can, even if you say, oh, that's not my thing, I'm not a math person, well, you still need to use data to support anything, right? Like business functions, everything. And so I've learned to have the appreciation, if I'm not going to do the calculation, at least do the interpretation of that data. Now, I understand going to college as a first-gen student, and I don't know if you said you're in the fellowship program, but financially, some people have to navigate the finances, maybe work while they're there, do all those things. How were you navigating that first-gen experience in college,
Yes.
financially, or,
Good
working
question.
while you're there and all that stuff?
All of the above, frankly. I took out student loans, and what I have is a 30-year mortgage on my brain. That's what I describe it as, right? I took out student loans for all three of my degrees, bachelor's, master's, and PhD. I'm still paying them back. I will probably own my home before I finish paying off my degrees. But that was the best investment I could make. First, they can't repossess my brain. They can't repossess my education. But more importantly, it was an investment in myself that I knew I would be able to figure out how to pay back in the long term, right? And so I took out the maximum of student loans every semester. I lived on campus as an undergrad up until my senior year, where I had there was an off-campus apartment that was owned by the university, and so I lived off campus, but it was still on campus. I worked as I don't even remember what they call it now. I wasn't an RA, but I helped check people in at night. Like I checked IDs in the overnight shift. That was back before we had all the electronic scanning to get into the buildings. So I checked people's IDs whenever they would come into the building. I worked the 12 to 6 shift, 12 midnight to 6 a.m. And then I would go to class, and then I would go to bed. I did that twice a week. I worked at the dining hall because that meant I could get free meals. And so every shift that I worked, I could eat. So I would work 10 shifts a week, and especially on weekends. That way I would make sure that I could have brunch and dinner on the weekends. I would also have a paycheck, but then I would also have the regular meals because the meal plan, you chose what your meal plan was. And I always went for the least expensive because I was trying to outlay the least amount of cash. And then I had an off-campus part-time job my first year and my senior year, but the 2 years in between, I did not. Part of it was I got involved in a lot of on-campus activities, and and then having both the working in the dining hall. And then we also had at the Ramsey Library, there was a cafe there as well. So you could pick up shifts there. You could pick up shifts in the cafe. So I would pick up shifts basically to make sure that A, I could eat, and B, I could have spending cash. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that kind of aligns, so much of the hidden struggles of, students nowadays that have food insecurity. We never think about all these layers of, they got to navigate all this in class. And then, you really said, like, I worked at this place to get meals, right? And so I'm pretty sure you have a lot of empathy for all those layered issues. How did you get an ability, it seems like a lot scheduling, staying up till 6 a.m. for the check-in. Did you get a chance to at least be a student, quote unquote student, with student orgs or extracurriculars to have the holistic college experience?
Yeah, I did. I was really active in a service organization, the Alpha Phi Omega. It's a co-ed service fraternity. We rechartered our chapter at UNC Asheville. I was a part of the crew that helped do the rechartering, and then we started not only with our active work on campus, but then we hosted a regional conference on our campus the year after I graduated. So I took a gap year between undergrad and grad school, in part to make sure that I had the money to do it, but also because I had committed to be the conference chair for this regional conference. And I wanted to make sure that I could follow through on that commitment. I was really involved in APO. I did other activities on campus as well. I was a student ambassador for the admissions office, and I was the first person that they hired to be, and I don't even remember the title now, but it was the ambassador leader. So ostensibly, I organized all of the ambassadors. I coordinated their schedules. I coordinated the tours. I worked with people coming to campus who needed tours, who wanted to go to visit classes. I did all of that organization working for the admissions office. Again, it was a job, but it was also supporting the university in ways that, now I look back on it, it helped me understand admissions. It helped me understand the college process, right? That after moving into administration, I see that helped frame my future decisions to keep coming back to higher ed and not use my research skills in the private sector, which I could. But I value what higher education brings to the world, and I value the fact that I could be a part of that. And so I think all of my activities were in some way, shape, or form thinking through how we have the possibility of giving to others.
So when you said you purposely took a gap year, when did the seed be planted to keep on going with your academics?
My academic advisor was also a faculty member. I think now about the differences in how college was at my small school versus how I see Mason working with professional advisors who are focused solely and wholly on supporting students through their academic journeys, and then faculty focusing in on what's happening inside the classroom and then some of the co-curricular activities. I chose to go to grad school in part because my final year, my senior year, my major professor, I had two, the one who convinced me to become a sociologist, and then the other whose work just resonated with me. Frankly, all of the faculty were fabulous. Let's just be honest. They were all fabulous. They were, yes, small knit community with a substantial amount of support. We all they taught 3 and 4 classes. And so everybody knew everybody, and we were all in the same place. So, but my two professors, Bramlett and Keith Bramlett, and then Marcia Gadina, I took Gadina's class. It was the senior seminar. And in that class, she had us read one of her own published papers. Now, previously, we had read books from published authors or textbooks, but I had never prior to that read a faculty member's written work. And sitting in her class, she talked us through what the process was. It was both content of the article, but also the research process, how you do the thing, how you do the work, how you then translate the data collection into the paper that then gets published. The way that she described her work, which was looking at, I can remember this, right? Like I graduated from college in 1997, and I remember this. The article was looking at the janitorial staff at a university and the ways in which that they were a part of the hierarchies of higher education, and how they were invisible labor that was critical for the of the work within higher education. So it was a critical organizational lens looking at labor and the issues around relationships of those in power, faculty, with those not in power, the janitorial staff. And I remember reading this article thinking, this is so cool. She did this work. she made visible something that is really important. And she's telling us how to do that. It's like opening up. It's the wizard behind the curtain. This is how this is done. All that stuff in the textbook. This is how this. And it was beyond exciting, right? It took all of the previous classes. Now I use the language of scaffolding, right? Everything had scaffolded to set me up to have that aha moment to say, oh. But the only way to get there is to go finish, get more education. That was also back in the day when you had the information cards that you could rip off of a poster standing, attached to the bulletin boards. And so they were outside of her office, and she would talk. We would come by to talk to her in her office during office hours. And we'd be like, do you know anything about this school? What about this school? Again, 1997, I graduated from college. Let's think back to where the internet was at that time, right? Websites were just becoming a reality for any organization, much less universities. Really just starting to use email and all of that. Like I got my first email account in 1996. So, right. So if we're thinking about framing of time, you mailed off asking for information about graduate schools. You then got the information. You then talked to the professors. Everything was on paper. And so I would have those conversations, and she kept telling me, you can do this. Not you should do this, but you can do this. You can do this. And then at about the same time, right as I was graduating, we hired a new vice chancellor for academic affairs, ostensibly the provost for the university. And he has a PhD in sociology. So he came to the sociology department. He talked to us. It was Dr. James Pitts. And Dr. Pitts came and he talked about his own educational trajectory, how he went through being an academic. He was at Northwestern, and then he ended up coming to UNC Asheville to serve. And I thought, oh, you can do that too. And so having those conversations with people who were using their degrees, again, to support the university, to support higher education, I look back now and realize how valuable those conversations were to helping me make those choices. So I took the gap year. I saved up. I got money. I thought for sure that I'd be able to survive in grad school. Again, took out the loans, right? I made it. I had a teaching assistantship that covered much of my graduate school expenses, but not all. And I thought that I could work part-time and cover it. That was a no. It lasted one semester. I worked part-time 2 days a week, and I couldn't, right? I just couldn't do it. So I ended up taking out the student loans for the master's degree, taking out the student loans for the PhD. It just, at the time, and I look back on it thinking that was probably the smartest decision I could make, because now I'd be like, I could do it all. But at the time, I actually had the insight to say, you have to focus on finishing this degree. There's just a period at the end of that sentence. You just have to.
Was both of those graduate and PhD both at UNC Asheville? You just kept going?
No, I did my graduate work at NC State.
Okay, so another part of North Carolina. And then where's the PhD work?
NC State.
So you wanted to stay in state to be around family. Was that a major decision, or was that because
financial?
You did your research? Like they were, like when people say, I'm going to this because, I knew this professor or sociologist they're doing it in at NC State, or was it mainly like a multitude of things, geographic and all that?
Geographic and financial, right? You're recognizing that North Carolina in-state tuition is a real discount, right? North Carolina has historically had a strong investment in public education. We'll continue to say that out loud. And NC State did have a strong program. They had a program that I wasn't quite sure what I was interested in, but given the classes I had taken, I saw some similarities in the work that the professors were doing, and I figured I could learn from them. I didn't quite know. And I will say it took me one semester to find my major advisor, right? It was someone who I took a class from, a required class that first semester. And he is, I will call him my academic father, and will say that he supported me from that very first semester by asking me pointed, silly questions, and in ways that pushed me to be a stronger thinker, and to also give myself grace whenever things didn't work out the way that they anticipated. So I was very lucky that, frankly, that first semester, the way that they required all of us to take in grad school, all of us took the same 3 classes. There was no choice. Everybody took the same 3. And I was in a class with someone whose, it turns out, research interests completely aligned with mine. And here again is how that happened. Just like with Gadina in that senior seminar class, Ted Greenstein talked about his own research as an example when he was teaching his statistics class. And he talked about his own work of how he used those methods in his research. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. That I'd like to learn more about that. And so I went to his office hours to talk a little bit about, class stuff. I mean, it turns out I understood exactly what he was doing, and I always did my homework early and got it all finished and whatever. The only A+ I think that I got in grad school was that very first semester in that class. But going to his office and talking to him about his research, because he mentioned it in class, which then completely shaped how I built my master's thesis project, my class projects for other courses. It shaped the ways that I engaged with other professors in their classes. It gave me someone to bounce ideas off when I was taking other coursework. And it also meant that historically he retired in 2019, 20, right? I visited him for his retirement right before the world shut down for COVID. So I guess it was 2020. And so I went to his retirement party. But we worked together up until his retirement. And so that was, for me, again, a beautiful opportunity to work with someone, because they opened up in class to tell us a little bit about who they were and what they were interested in.
Now we're going to just fast forward, because I want to get to the career experience. But
Sure.
What was, after you get the PhD, what was one of your first roles in academia as a professor, doctorate person?
Yeah. So I did a 2-year postdoc at UNC Chapel Hill. My first time on the job market with my PhD, I had an inflated ego and sense of self and applied only to the top schools, and then got confused when my phone didn't ring. And I didn't know people weren't coming after me because I had publications and I had teaching experience and I was getting a PhD from a ranked school. I didn't get it, right? It was a ranked school, but not one of the top 25, right? So, the top 25 wasn't calling me to come there. I didn't understand that. Again, I think that's partially my first generation a belief in myself. I can do it all, without necessarily the recognition of the structural constraints that are ahead of you in a system that is stratified.
I like to call that like the hidden curriculum, right? Like you think about there's politics and dynamics, and even I will say this, I think the smartest people, brightest people, most research people, there's still a layer of social capital that happens there, like who who you're attached to. My research is under Dr. So-and-so. And I think that's a hidden curriculum that you still have to navigate, even as the smartest, brightest, most brilliant PhD student, understanding there's an intersection of social capital and politics and structures, like you just said, structural dynamics.
Absolutely. And honestly, that's how I ended up doing the next set of things. So the postdoc happened because someone who is currently in that postdoc at Chapel Hill applied for a job at NC State my last year. And, I had already, I was not doing well on the job market. And I asked one of my professors, so if they're leaving, does that mean there's a position open? She knew somebody who knew somebody. She made a phone call and found out, in fact, yes, that meant that there would be a postdoc open. She connected me with someone who could potentially serve as my preceptor. Because I lived in the RDU area, I could go and have coffee with her. And so I went and physically met with her. This was before Zoom, right? And I could sit down. We talked about the possibilities, the strengths, selling myself as I'm not going to be a burden to you. I'm going to be a benefit to you. She supported me, and that's how I got my postdoc, right? So yes, but it was also me paying attention. If someone is not in this position, maybe the position is open, but then your point is well made, knowing someone who knew someone to make a phone call. Similarly, with getting my job at Mason, I was on the job market again, much wider net this time, right? Much wider net. But in that wider net, Mason was hiring for someone in the sociology program because they were getting ready to launch a PhD in sociology. They had a master's, but did not yet have a PhD. And friends, people who were at Mason were looking for people who could fill that hole in the curriculum. So turns out one of the people who was not on my committee, who was like, I took 2 classes with him. I knew him. He was the grad director when I graduated. One of his close friends from graduate school was the department chair at Mason. And they had, talked and said, hey, we're looking for somebody. Do you have anyone graduating, or do you know anyone who's recently graduated? We met at an American Sociological Association meeting. We had lunch. We chatted. I applied. I decided, yes, this is the kind of place I want to go. I applied. I was offered the job. 2006, we moved to George Mason University.
Now, keyword, I heard 2 things there. One, 2006, big championship year. Were you before basketball or after basketball?
I signed my contract before the run to the Final Four. Okay. So I was the only person in my building who knew where George Mason University was, because if you recall, they beat UNC Chapel Hill on the way to the Final Four. And so that Monday, I came into the office and I put my picture of the Patriot on my door. And A, nobody knew where it was. And B, the director of the center was like, really? Really? Like, yes, really? They're going to be paying my paycheck next year. Yes, I'm proud of that. Again, coming from North Carolina, if you're not paying attention to men's basketball, then you are under a rock. And so, of course, I was all in my Mason gear because I'd already signed my contract in January before the run to the Final Four.
And then what I heard so this was a family move, or can you, was that solo move?
It was a family move. So my partner and I have been together since, good gracious, 1998. And so we moved, we had a house in between Chapel Hill and Raleigh, because he worked still in Raleigh and I worked in Chapel Hill with my postdoc. So we lived halfway in between in Apex. Lovely little house. It was on 1/3 of an acre. It was right behind the high school, so you could hear the football games and the band. It was lovely. So then we moved to Northern Virginia in 2006 at the height of the housing bubble. So we couldn't live, if we think about, temporally, the bubble popped in 2007, 2008, but it was hot in Northern Virginia. We made an offer on a house, and we were there for 5 days, made an offer on a house, and within 24 hours, the house was ours, right? But it was so much more expensive than our townhouse. Was twice the price, if not more, than our 1/3 of an acre, 1,800 square foot, single family home in Apex, North Carolina. And we live in a townhouse out in one of the suburbs. We still have our townhouse there, actually. But that was also a huge challenge, moving to an area that had a hot housing market, and not, I really wanted to be close to campus. I wanted to be close to my job, and it's 12.5 miles, it's an hour, depending upon the day, the traffic, or at least it was before we moved to Korea.
So, I see that, and I'm also being very alert. This was the first time you lived out of state. You
That's
grew up,
correct.
born and bred, North Carolina. What was some of your growing pains to, I guess, the hustle and bustle of the DMV, which, I think is quite different than a lot of areas in the United States?
No question of that. Now, I'd always lived in a suburb. So living in a suburb was, I could manage that. I loved and still do love the diversity of Northern Virginia. What diversity means in North Carolina is not the same as what diversity means in Northern Virginia. And my first class was that moment of, oh, this looks different. This feels different. And knowing Mason now, right, 2006 versus 2024, having worked at the organization for so long, it was exactly Mason, right? But for me, it was like, oh, okay. And I could, when I taught in North Carolina, I could draw on the fact that I was at NC State, which was a land grant institution, and I can draw on some of the historic understandings of what land grant and extension work meant, and who the people were in the classrooms that I taught, which I could not do when I moved to Mason. So it was also rethinking what it was like to be in an almost urban university, right? Which again, NC State is an urban, it's in Raleigh, but its history is not as an urban institution. Mason being younger, Mason growing up with Northern Virginia, it meant that my life itself, I just had to get used to eventually listening to audiobooks in my car, which, okay, fine. I grew to love audiobooks, managing how to deal with traffic. But what I loved the most was the fact that I really was experiencing more diversity, right? More of what, I will say this. I haven't said it as clearly as I would like, but I will say it now. I am a product of public education from beginning to end. I believe at my absolute core in the value of public education as a public good for the public and for all parts of the public. And I'm proud that I have been able to serve in a university that is a true public serving university, and that has afforded me the chance to continue to do that service. And so my public in Mason was a little different than my public at NC State. But the mission, the values of what a true public university is are still the same.
So, I mean, I want to respect your time because I know you're busy over there across the pond. Let's just jump right into it. How did this career experience begin? How did, you're working, you came to this young institution in 2006, and I know we could fill in so much in between that about how it grew and how it changed, and we definitely could go down that. But I want to jump to this part of this unique space. How did this career experience happen?
By accident, which is, I think, how much of my career has happened, quite frankly. I put myself in, well, let me take that back. Not by accident. Right? I set myself up to be ready for this kind of opportunity when it emerged. So I was promoted in 2012, and 2017, 2018, I was up for promotion to full professor, tenured in 2012. At that time, I had also been engaging in service around the university, especially in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. I'd served on the curriculum committee. I'd been undergraduate program coordinator in sociology. I had served as interim director of our Center for Social Science Research. So I had a little bit of an administrative experience. I'd served as a faculty fellow in a couple of places as well. So I had a little bit of administrative experience. I was interested in and valued the work that we do at the curricular level, supporting students' intellectual development and thinking through how we can support faculty in doing that work well within their disciplinary frameworks. So when Debbie Bain Davis, who was the former dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, announced that she was leaving and Robert Matz was announced as interim dean, there was a question of who's going to take Robert's job, right? Who's going to serve as interim senior associate dean in the College of Humanities and Social Sciences? And it turns out it was me. Robert and I had worked together on the curriculum committee for 2 years. He had seen my work there. He had seen my work in my department, and he thought that I would be a good fit inside of Chess. So I served for 9 months while we did a search for the dean there. I came back to the faculty in sociology. I was grad director. I then moved into the faculty senate, being very active there. And then when Robert got the chance to come over here to Korea as the campus dean, Ann Artis needed an interim senior associate dean, and she invited me to come back and serve in that role and then help reshape what Chess was going to do. And so one of the things that I was able to do in working with Ann was to help craft what is now the dean's office in Chess, where the position that Robert and I both had held was split into 3 roles so that there could really be true investment of time, effort, and energy in undergraduate, graduate, and faculty development and support. We had been trying to do it all in that one role. And so I worked with Ann and helped create that space. And so that was my second term as an administrator. And then I moved into serving as what it was called at the time, Faculty Senate Chair. That is a faculty role, but in truth, it is an interesting opportunity to engage with administration in the work of the university while still ensuring that you are the faculty voice, faculty support, and faculty kind of liaison. My time as Senate chair was the time when we sought a new president. So I'm the first and, to my knowledge, only faculty member who has ever served as the chair or co-chair of a search committee for a university president in the United States. That was an amazing opportunity to work with our board of visitors to really help shape what the university. And then COVID. In the middle of that, COVID. But so during COVID, I had said I was going to serve my 3 years as a faculty senate chair. That's the term. This position opened up. The person who was in this position needed to leave to go be with family, and this position opened up. Remember back in COVID, we were all working from home. We had our ties to our home units, but we were doing our things. We were kind of doing our lives, right? So when the position announcement came up, I remember going, I looked at it and I thought about it and I was like, that's interesting. All the things they're asking for faculty and academic affairs associate dean, I can do those things. So then I went to breakfast. I saw it. I would get up every morning and I would, walk on my treadmill so that I could stay active during COVID. I went to breakfast that morning, and of course we're all at home because at this point we now have 2 kids. And so I went to breakfast and said, so what do you all think about Korea? And they're like, Korea? What do you mean, Korea? And so I explained the job for them. And my partner said, hey, that sounds like a great opportunity. I think you should do it. My older child, who at the time was 10, said, well, okay, sure, fine, whatever. I don't care. My younger child, who at the time was 5, said, where's Korea? So we then went to the world map and pointed out where Korea was. And every step of the way in that, my family was a part of it. They were very excited about the possibility of doing this. Go back to my first gen experience. I didn't do study abroad as a college student. I thought it was too expensive.
I'm so glad you brought that. I was about to say, did you do study abroad? Did you?
Yep.
How about with your research? How about I'm a doctoral student. I went to some conference in Geneva or something did I, see Europe, and I don't know where's a super famous place. I think in Geneva is the only place where
somewhere
all the minds get together.
So I had no study abroad experience. This is my family's study abroad experience. And that's the way we talked about it, right? That mom didn't do study abroad as a college student. So we're just taking everybody along for the ride. I had done an exchange with the Higher School of Economics in Moscow for a week. So I'd been in Moscow for a week in 2012. we had a FIPSI grant through the Department of Education, and we had faculty come over to Fairfax, and then I and several other faculty had gone over to HSE, and I had traveled for vacation, right, to a few select Caribbean countries and then to Canada, right? So it's not like I'd been anywhere interesting. Ireland, I went to Ireland once. That was like my graduation gift when I, finished my PhD. So we're not talking like I'm a world traveler. I'd never been to Asia. We packed up in the middle of COVID, and moved to Korea and had 19 days of quarantine, because that was back in the days of quarantine, and Korea took COVID and still takes COVID very seriously. We were masking outdoors way past when you all had stopped doing indoor masking, right? And it was illegal to, like, you would get a fine, $500, if you were not wearing your mask outdoors, not even indoors. So we moved to Korea during COVID. And my first year was, getting my kids figured out in this international school, of us figuring out how to live in an apartment when we've been living in a townhouse. We live on campus, which I'm thankful for, because my commute to work is 5 minutes. And then my job has been amazing. It has been transformative. It has given me a chance to grow. It has given me a chance to learn. I never knew that I would need to know about Korean labor law, but it turns out I've learned an awful lot about Korean labor law. I've also learned a lot about how much many cultures value education as both a right and a privilege. The differences in how we afford students the chance to grow and learn are stark. I come from Mason, where the average age of the student is between 25 and 26, right? The number of non-traditional and returning students at Mason is substantial. The diversity of the student population were majority minority students. It is a microcosm of the U.S. and the U.S. higher education framework. That is Mason. Korea is different, where 80% of the population has a bachelor's degree. 80% of the adult population above the age of 26 has a bachelor's degree. So the expectation for higher education is not only real and palpable, but begins in primary school. My child in the 4th grade was telling me he did not want to go to college because he was seeing the pressures that other 4th graders were being placed on to do well enough to get into the best colleges. These are 9-year-olds who are concerned about the college they are going to go to, right? Now, granted, I'm old, so I don't know if it's like that in the U.S. anymore. It may be.
No, it's not. I mean, obviously, the enrollment cliff is growing. It's not. But also at the flip side, pressure makes diamonds, because I think if you think about it mathematically and all that, our test scores are not tracking the same as places all over the world. So it might be a tomato, like your well-being, but you're going to be academically crushing it. Who knows? I love that you had that sociology. Now, my one question is, did you get a little taste? Like, did you at least get to visit and be like, all right, I don't want to do this, or like, can I tour the campus first, or you jumped in the pool deep in both feet?
I am the only person, only administrator ever hired here at Mason Korea who did not have a campus visit. My interview was fully on Zoom, standing in my son's bedroom with my laptop on his loft bed. 6 hours. That was my interview. That was it.
Now, on the flip side, I always do this, man, if this don't work out, let me bounce. What did you and your family decide as we're gonna talk, if this ain't working out, we coming back? What was your expectation that, if we're not feeling this, it's okay. Mom's gonna try to apply back home.
Yep.
What was that decision like? And on the flip side, when did it click? Okay, we can do this. We're doing it. It's okay. We made it. Those two things.
So I am still a faculty member in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, and I have the right to go back at any time. So it is both a positive and a negative. They miss me, they say, and I appreciate that. But that also means that when this is over, I have a job to return to at the US campus. That has always been, I will say that has made this transition so much easier because of that safety net, that if I failed, if they decided I wasn't the right fit, if I decided I wasn't the right fit, that I didn't have to go searching for another job, right? I did engage in an international search. This was not an internal only search. They did do an international search, and I happened to be lucky enough to have been chosen for the position. But that safety component has been real, right? It clicked for me now, and I've signed for a whole host of interesting tax reasons. My contracts can only be 2 years at a time. And so I'm getting towards the end of my second 2-year contract. But that meant that, in the end of my 2-year contract, the first
you revisit this topic for yourself and your family.
Yep. For my family, for me.
I can imagine as the contracts come up, you have a family gathering and say, hey, you got 2 more in us, or we don't? Like, what do y'all think? And it's a family decision.
That you nailed it. Like, where are we? What are we doing? How are we collectively?
How we doing?
And and I will say it clicked here. It was so funny. The first couple of weeks, I had a colleague, Kelly here. She's one of the other associate deans. She had taken me to Costco. And we had gone to Costco because, like, there were things from home, from the US, that the kids wanted. And Korea works differently in that you can order all sorts of things with your phone. You can do amazing things with your phone, but you have to have a Korean phone number and a Korean bank account. And you can't do that until you're a permanent resident or a resident, right? A legal resident. So it took us about 2 months, give or take a penny, before we could do any online online delivery of anything to the apartment. So we would go to the grocery store, but like there was we want chicken nuggets kind of moment, right? So I went with her to Costco, and she was driving me back and telling me some stories about when just sort of family stories of her parents and kind of their life whenever she and her husband moved back to Korea. She's Korean American. Her husband is a pastor, and so they moved back to Korea for his ministry. And she said that her father gave her the advice that you will know in 100 days. And 100 days is actually really important in Korea. It's when children have their first naming and birthday celebration. 100 days is an important marker in life and in life events. So she said, he told her that in 100 days, you will know if this is the right decision for you. Give it 100 days. Honest to goodness, the 100 days, it was Frank's birthday, and our stuff got delivered from it. We had shipped all of our stuff from the US, right? Like our winter clothes and our computers and all of that got delivered. They both showed up on the 100th day. I had it marked on my calendar when the 100th day was going to be, because I knew that. And by the time that we had gotten to that 100th day, we'd gotten into a routine. We understood we felt like this could be home for a while. All of the signs, worked with, Frank having his birthday and our stuff being delivered, and just being able to see ourselves here. And I think that's, in truth, like the best metaphor for anything, right? Like you have to give yourself time.
Give yourself 100 days. I used to tell people, like, when they had a new role, I ain't gonna lie, I hated my job at Mason because, I didn't put a lot of pressure. But then it was like I gave myself one full semester and it clicked. So, think about that. That's probably optimally like 90 days. And then you give yourself a full 2 semesters and say, I went through the cycle of a full academic year. I know what I'm doing. So that's interesting. Maybe we should change America's perception of that 90-day probation period to the 100-day probation period. Just give it 10 more days. But I think that is a very applicable statement. Like, you need to ride it out a little bit. Ride out things. Don't quit too early. Ride it out. And if it's not working at 90 days or 100 days, allow yourself time to pivot. But also don't set crazy expectations for. Like, don't set What do you want to do in your first 90 days of office? What do you want to do in your first 90? Like, give yourself time, because you can't make no moves. You can't make any systemic change in 30 days. Like, that don't make no sense. You know what I'm saying?
Because you don't know where everything is. I mean,
Yeah.
I joked that, whenever I was bringing in faculty here, it doesn't matter because we're in one physical building. But when I was at the US campus, I'd be like, your first semester, your job is to find the bathrooms in all the buildings. Like that is your job. Like you teach and you find the bathrooms. And then after that, you can figure everything else out. You don't need to worry about how you're going to get promoted in 5 years. Like, your first semester is truly, how do I get to my car or the bus stop and back? How do I order the books for my class? How do I get the technology to work in the classroom? All of you don't worry about anything big in any of these roles in that first while. And I will say that there was that pressure here of the incumbent had been out of the job for several months. I started my job actually from Fairfax. We worked, we lived in Fairfax, and I did the job from May to July there. And then we moved here in July. That gave us plenty of time to get the, kids out of school, to get the house packed up, to do all the things, right? Plus the apartment that I was moving into needed to have the people living in it moved out, and they needed to clean it before I could move in. Before we close, I want to say just a couple of things. I love being at Mason Korea because it is still Mason, right? I love the opportunities that have been given to me to learn and to grow. I've had to do things that I never thought I was going to have to do serving in this role, because that's the nature of anything new, right? You don't know what's going to come up. You don't know what opportunities are going to emerge, and you don't know how you can grow until you put yourself in that circumstance. So when the opportunity to serve as interim dean emerged, the answer was yes, in that I don't know how. I've never done this before, but I've been in many situations where I've never done this before. And so let's learn how to do it. There's lots of people around you to support you. There's lots of folks who are rooting for you to be successful. And I think that's also a mind shift that I hope brought here, but I hope that we see generally at Mason and in higher education, that in these leadership roles, people are rooting for you to be successful, not rooting for you to fail, right? They're not looking for you to fail so that they can pounce on you and get rid of you, because that's expensive in a whole host of ways, and it undermines morale. They're rooting for you to be successful. So switching that mindset to, people are not looking for you to fail. They're looking for you to succeed. How can you learn to ask for help so that you can be successful, as opposed to asking for help suggests that you're not doing your job and you're not going to be successful, right? Flipping that mindset. That took me, I will be honest, a while, because of the cultural shifts, because of the ways in which that I'm now supervising people that I had never supervised like in that way before, working in a different cultural context that I didn't have experience with outside of books. Working on 2 continents, my email pings 24/7, right? Because when we finish work, you all start over there, and vice versa. And so my email pings 24/7. How do you manage the expectations of both campuses? The answer to that is, you believe that everyone is here trying to help you be successful, and that they also want you to sleep. And so you should not be answering your email at 2 a.m. You should go to sleep. Thinking through differently what it is to serve and to lead. This truly is and remains a wonderful experience for me. I will not say that it has been all roses all the time. Like, there's some thorns, right? There's some thorns. COVID was awful. We all didn't like it.
Yes, no.
But and here we navigate different governmental expectations than you all have there, but there are governmental expectations that must be met. And as is the case, And all universities that have governmental entities that they need to report to, sometimes it feels as though that you're not
It's
sure if you're really doing what they are looking for you to do, and it
doing the work.
feels a little
Yeah.
frustrating, right?
Yeah, doing the work. And it's hard. And I
Yeah.
think that you're like now understanding that you're wearing two brains. And I'm glad you brought that up. And I want to respect your time. I know you're real busy. So I'm just going to go. I definitely, this is honestly, I muted myself way more than I ever did because I wanted to hear you fully explain yourself and not interrupt you. But this has been so powerful for me. And the craziness now that I know that my aunt and uncle, that's crazy.
The world is
Nah,
teeny tiny.
hey,
Oh my
Dr. I'm gonna
gosh.
send this to him, drop their name. Like, here's a funny thing. I've always thought, like, the ivory tower, like, oh, my aunt and uncle are so smart. And now that I'm getting my PhD, I'm like, I could be like my aunt and uncle. That's crazy. So I want to just get right to it. It's called shot for shot. You get to ask me any random question. I get to ask you a random question. What you want to go first? I go first for your random question for shot for shot.
How about you go first?
Like, I think that kind of aligns with your I guess I believe it was, you said your son's chicken nugget needs. What is one thing in America that you miss more than anything? Like food, sport, activity. What
My
is one thing you miss?
oven. Okay. Oh, you know what? I'm going to take that back. I miss my oven, but I miss my dryer more. My washer and dryer, man, if I could have my washer and dryer in my oven, y'all might not see me again.
Is it because
But
of size? Is it because of the apartment? Like, what do you miss about it? Like, is it like minimalist?
I
Like they got
have
a small one? What they doing?
so our apartment has a combined washer dryer. And so even when you hit the dry cycle, it comes out wet and you have to put it on the drying rack. And even if you've gone through the drying cycle, it's still going to be a little crunchy, right? And if you don't go through the drying cycle, your towels are exceedingly crunchy, just like they were on my grandmother's drying line whenever I would go to her house in the mountains, right? Like she would ring wash, ring dry, hang it out on the drying line. You would have crunchy towels. I'm not a fan of crunchy towels. I like my towels fluffy. So I miss fluffy towels out of the dryer, like that hot fabric softener smell. I miss that. I come from a family of bakers. And so again, in the mountains, you would bake cookies and cakes especially because then you could wrap it up and take it in your lunchbox and go wherever you were going, right? We have a convection oven here and we are still learning each other's love languages, right? Like I can do some pies. I can roast some vegetables. My cakes fail every single time. And so I guess that's good, for my cholesterol that I'm not baking as many cakes. On the other hand, one of the things that has been part of my giving to those that have been valuable to me in my life is that I like to bake for them. I like to say thank you by giving them something that I have made. And I have felt a little frustrated that I've not been able to follow through on something that is important to me in that regard.
All right, what's your question for me?
What do you really want to do with your PhD whenever you get finished?
Be honest, I just want to be Dr. Phil, the black one. No, I'm joking. Honestly, in reality, I think the main thing with academics, I definitely with this podcast is, I would say, some ascension in higher ed leadership. I think, I've been most of my career, well, all my career has been in student affairs, university life. But maybe dabble into the academics, teach a course or something that I'm interested in. I've always explored. I've always liked history, but you don't need to be a history. You don't need to be a history major to teach history. I could teach like communication. Like I'm getting my PhD in communication. I could teach an African American history course, but related to the media or something. So I always thought about that. And I think of it in a three-pronged thing. Either I stay put and I ascend in higher ed. I don't, and I go into the private sector and be a consultant as a doctor. Or I just stay put where I'm at in student affairs, right? Not go the academic route. all three of those with the name doctor, I would have doors open to. I like writing. I like public speaking. I like doing keynotes and stuff. So maybe people will just book me as, Dr. Wilkerson will be coming to the stage. Or I've always thought about this. This is the most random thing. When they like flash to like people on the news and they're like, here's an expert on this. And it's like randomly, it's like, it has nothing to do with what they're talking about, but they flash to Dr. Wilkerson and I say my 2 cents and then they camera like hand off. I don't know. They're just, I feel like a lot of, I love what you just said, is that beyond, it's not just prestige. Obviously, I'm not chasing that, but it's also about like the social mobility and opportunities that are yielded by a doctorate that, you can do. I don't need it, but I know there's value in it. Like there's value in credibility. There's value in the branding of having the word doctor next to your name and having research and saying that I know the process of doing research, being a critical thinker, being someone that when I speak out loud, just because I have this next to my name, there's credibility there. That's very powerful. I think about like very simplistic. I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, the oldest and coldest fraternity. And guess who is one of our most remarkable highlighted brothers of all time? Dr. Martin Luther King. We don't call him just Martin Luther King. You always put doctor in front of that. He was able to make systemic change. I'm pretty sure open doors and be credible at rooms that he wasn't in because he had the word doctor in front of his name. He did not need, to do the work. He didn't need to get a doctorate in divinity. Like he was going to be Martin Luther King regardless. But I'm pretty sure he understood that I'm going to make a systemic change and use education as a tool for that. So I don't know. That's my grand thing. I don't know. Also, maybe like I said, at the very bare minimum, I want to be called Dr. Phil. That's kind of cool. Dr. Phil, the black one. Sounds cool.
I was gonna say you're gonna have to figure out how to differentiate yourself from that other guy.
Say Dr. Phil asterisk the black one or the other one or trademark so I don't get sued. And I will say this. I will say this, and historically, individually, my grandfather, he was Dr. Charles James, MD. My aunts and uncles, people like, it sounds very egocentric, whatever. I want to prove it to myself that I'm smart enough, that I can do it. I'm not saying like, I'm not a first gen student. I'm the opposite. I'm like a third, fifth generation. And I've always had, I told someone the other day, the burden of Black excellence, meaning like, I'm not the first, but like at the end of the day, like my grandfather was a doctor and he went to med school in the 1950s at McHenry and he didn't quit and he did it. Like, if I don't even try, am I living up to like, he didn't open all those doors for me to like be mediocre. That sounds bad to say, but like, my dad was one of the first, Black students to go to VMI. I don't think my dad worked that hard for me to be mediocre. My mom was a doctor. I used to think of it as pressure, but now I channel it like I just don't have mediocre in my DNA, like in a sense that like that's not doing my ancestors service. Like it's actually disrespectful if I don't give it a shot, and if I don't get the doctorate, whatever, but if I don't try to push myself academically, then I feel like that's disrespecting my like they didn't work that hard for me to be mediocre or work that hard for me to not try my best, at least, like my parents always said, try your best. They're proud of me regardless, but like, I don't know in my heart if I didn't try my best or if I didn't give it an effort and, also like say that I'm smart. I like that fact. Like I'm smart too. I know not everyone that's a doctor is smart, but there is a sense of academic muscle. Like you flex your academic muscle and you tried really hard and you did things that not the general public pursues. That is hard. It's, not everyone is a savant. Not everyone's a genius. I'm learning this as a PhD student where I used to think everyone was the best in their class. Some people will just work very hard. There's hard workers. You're a hard worker academically. Like you read more than other people. Like, you work in your studies and you put in that time. And so I'm learning that, like, I think I can flex my academic brain muscles, and I can read and write and stretch myself in that. So that's it. I don't know. I think that just gave me a pep talk for class tomorrow. like, I needed that to like say, like, why am I doing this with 2 kids? This your trash. I tell a lot of young people, keep going while you're young. Don't do this later, because I don't recommend 2 stars out of 5. It's a PhD. Keep going while you're young and your mind is malleable, and you got it, because it's hard to do it full time, but it's accomplishable. You can do it. Anyone can do it. So, wow, that was, I don't know, I did not expect to go on that rant about it today, but
I'm glad that I could enable that for you.
You got me in a mood. So this is a great episode. I think I'm really excited. I'm glad that you took the time to do this. Now that's the part of the show where it's shout outs and plugs, meaning you show love to anyone you want to show love to, and then you plug anything that you want the listeners to be aware of that I'll put in the show notes, like Mason. Definitely, I'm already going to put Mason Korea's website and all those different things, but the stage is set. Shout outs and plugs.
Absolutely. So shout outs to all of the women teachers in high school who support young women's desires to do things they didn't themselves think they could do. Shout out to Marcia Godina and Keith Bramlett, who were critical in my thinking that I could be a sociologist. Ted Greenstein, who, as my academic father, helped me. I fill in the blank, right? Like, just fill in the blank. And gave me the encouragement and sometimes the snark to go with it, to take myself only as seriously as I needed to take myself. I want to say thank you truly to my colleagues in sociology and anthropology in Fairfax who've been patient with my departure, and also my students, my grad students, who continue to work with me despite the fact that we have 13 and 14-hour differences. I'm thankful that I've had a couple of students finish and graduate, and I've got a few more coming up this year, and I continue to learn from them, and they help me stay grounded as a sociologist. I want to say thank you and a shout out to Robert Matz, who believed in me twice and has given me this chance to serve. To my current colleagues here at Mason Korea, I work with an amazing set of teams, both the staff that work with me in faculty and academic affairs, as well as our Industry University Collaboration Foundation. That's our research office, but also all of our faculty. They remind me again of why we do what we do. And then at the end of the day, a shout out to my family, who is without whom none of this would be possible. Both the family that gave me life, but also the family that came with me here to Korea. Things for folks things I want people to know about. We're really excited about the ways that Mason Korea is, and now we're moving into our second decade, really turning into the Mason that everyone expected us to be. There's a lot of great stuff happening with the undergraduate research scholars program there at the U.S. campus that we are bringing here. Same thing with the learning assistance program. The ways that we are supporting our research centers to enable our faculty and students to do transformative research here in Asia. I want to ensure that the people who are doing the work every day get the attention that they deserve. And as a result, I also want to say, as we are moving into, I never know what month is what month, but as we move into thinking about employee appreciation months, weeks, days, whatever that might be, a recognition that administrators, faculty, and students are nowhere without the staff that allow us to do our jobs and help us shine. And so I want to especially say to everyone, wherever you work, please take a minute to say thank you to those who are around you, to give you, who allow you to do the work that you do, so that you can also allow them to do the work that they do. That generosity knows no boundaries and knows no cultural barriers. So say thank you to those who are around you.
Well, thank you so much. I'll make sure to put all the relevant resources about Mason Korea in the show notes of this podcast. Positive Filter listeners, it's been another wonderful episode in my Dean miniseries. And yes, you are always a Dean, I crown you in my heart. Also, please connect, share, give this episode a rating or review. As you know, every episode is dedicated to the memory of my father-in-law, Jeff Kirsch, and the anti-hunger fund that is in his honor, to all the work that he did fighting food insecurity across the world. And so I use this episode to elevate him. Additionally, if you're a member of the Mason Nation, please consider submitting a Pats for Patriots. It's a kindness e-card where you can elevate everyone that is part of the Mason Nation. As a Prince of Positivity, we want to make sure that that is included in every show note of every episode. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for taking your time. Please elevate this episode and share it with your family and friends, and have a good day. Thank you for listening to Positive Filter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.